Coming up, we hear from 3 Indigenous leaders in honor of Women's History Month. And there's a renewed effort to shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline. Plus, the Denver March Powwow welcomes dancers back to the arena. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. A new federal report is highlighting the hurdles Native voters face when trying to cast their ballots. On Thursday, President Joe Biden released a report on Native voting rights. The report is the result of an executive order Biden signed last year. The 54-page document was put together with help of a steering committee, tribal leaders, and Native communities. The president also directed the creation of a committee that would examine the challenges that deter Indigenous communities from voting. According to the report, some of the obstacles Native voters face include language barriers, cultural disrespect, isolation, and persistent poverty. In a statement, the White House said the attacks on voting rights must be met with federal legislation, and a key recommendation calls on all government leaders to do more to protect Indigenous voting rights. How does a company measure its impact on climate change? New rules from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission could have a huge impact on financial institutions, especially banks. ICT's editor-at-large, Mark Trahant, reports.
The SEC is proposing a new set of rules that measure a company's impact on the climate. Those rules include what's called Scope 3. This would require banks and other financial institutions to keep track of how their loans and investments impact greenhouse gas emissions. Kate Finn is the executive director of First Peoples Worldwide. She said one of the takeaways from the 500-plus pages in the proposed rule is the very detailed specifics.
Scope 3 is the best way, when they talk about what Scope 3 is, the best way to measure the impacts on local communities and to understand what those risks really are.
A 2021 study by the global nonprofit CDP found that greenhouse gas emissions from a company's supply chain are on average 11.4 times higher than its operational emissions. So the only way to reduce emissions is to target the oil and gas producers that are funded by banks. Even that might not be enough, because these new reports look backwards, not forwards.
So the cistern has already fallen through the permafrost because the permafrost melted. The tailings dam has already leached minerals because the humidity is higher in the air. These are things that are going to happen in the past and will be disclosed, which is good. It's good to watch. But I think what I would push for in the future in terms of investor understanding is that one thing that disclosures will do is force companies to have a forward-looking view of how to mitigate and assess impacts on local communities around the climate and around other things as well.
In Phoenix, Mark Trahant, ICT Newscast.
If you're Indigenous and want to work, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce wants to see your regalia. The bank is launching a new hiring program intended to recruit Indigenous Canadians as bank tellers. But something about the process seemed off to Ojibwe and Métis citizen Christine Paquette. She discovered that the application encourages candidates to submit a video of themselves in traditional regalia. It also urges candidates to tell their favorite traditional story to recruiters. The bank stated in a tweet that the questions that offended Paquette had been designed in consultation with Indigenous community leaders and elders. The bank did not immediately explain what these questions had to do with the work they are hiring for, and the regalia reference has since been removed from the online application. An Algonquin artist is bringing together their culture and science fiction to engage in cosplay. While watching the hit Disney Plus series The Mandalorian, artist Crystal Rat wondered, what if the Mandalorian was Indigenous? The artist swapped out the Star Wars character's signature armor for wegwas, which is the word for birch bark in her language. For some Native communities, birch bark is traditionally used to make canoes, baskets, and cradle boards. Rat spoke to ICT about some of the images she included as tributes on her armor.
And there's a story that my mom used to tell me about the tallest trees that you see on the horizon. Those are the ones that were told, were given the responsibility to greet people when they leave or when they come home. So I have it here, like some trees sticking out, like just little details like that, just to honor my mom's stories.
The birch bark armor will soon be on display at the Idle Jorg Museum in Indiana, with another stop planned for the Santa Fe Indian Market. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, we meet strong Indigenous leaders in honor of Women's History Month. A new report calls for the shutdown of the Dakota Access Pipeline. But first, we remember Alaska Congressman Don Young. Don Young, the congressman for all Alaska, has died at age 88. He was the current dean of the House of Representatives. After being elected in 1973, he was the longest-serving Republican in the history of Congress. Regular contributor John Tasuda pays tribute to Young's accomplishments.
As you would think from somebody that's been here for so long, people forget all of the issues that he was so involved with. And I know you guys put out a great article on him just the other day, talking about, but those are really recent things, VAWA and the allotment stuff in 2016. In the scope of his tenure, those are very recent. And I will tell you that in the early 2000s, when I was in the Senate and we were working on reauthorizing the Indian Health Care Act at that time, Don was like the monster champion in the House. He really put that on his shoulders and pushed it forward as a policy debate in the House, just by dint of his personality and how much he cared for it. We had a lot of interest in the Senate. There wasn't that much in the House at the time until Don said, no, this is going to be an issue for the House and we're going to take this up. And so, things like that, people forget because they happened 20 years ago now, just about, right? But, he was just around for so long and was such a champion on so many issues that you almost cannot name a tribal issue in the last 30 years that Don did not have a hand in.
You can read more about Representative Don Young's life and legacy at IndianCountryToday.com. Coinciding with World Water Day, NDN Collective released a data-driven report called Faulty Infrastructure and the Impacts of the Dakota Access Pipeline. It lays out a detailed timeline of events focusing on three major areas: treaty rights, engineering and construction flaws, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. NDN Collective President and CEO Nick Tilson gives background on the report.
There was a really awesome team put together, who actually started on the ground in Standing Rock, a tech team that was put together. And this tech team had all kinds of different experience. They had experience from, tribal governance, understanding of the treaties, understanding of the laws. Some of them also had experience in working on pipeline projects in Europe and other places. And so bringing in experts, right? Bringing in subject matter experts who have created mitigation plans, who have created infrastructure plans, taking their knowledge and applying it to this report and saying, compared to other pipelines around the world and other things, how does this one compare up? And the reality is Energy Transfer Partners and the Dakota Access Pipeline has a terrible track record. And to be clear, I don't think any big fossil fuel companies are good. And I think most of them are destructive. I think all of them are destructive and extractive. But this is the worst of the worst. They're sort of like the mechanic you don't take your car to, because they will always mess up and it'll come back worse. And so bringing these expert, we learned a lot about everything from the pressure in the pipeline, when X amount of gallons are going through it, to what the pump stations have to be based on elevations, based on temperatures, based on all of these different things. And so having these subject matter experts be able to bring their specific from the field expert knowledge to this was really important. Also, some of these experts often are the experts that provide information, to pipeline companies when they're going to environmental impact study processes. And we were able to access that information, and put it into a report, and then put this report out to the tribes and to the people so they can use it to advocate for themselves.
The report urges the Biden administration to shut down the pipeline.
This is important because Indigenous people rose up, and one of the Biden administration's goals, they have goals on climate change and combating climate change. They have goals on strengthening tribal sovereignty and strengthening nation-to-nation relationships with tribal governments. And this is an opportunity for the Biden administration to do both of those things, to make a decision to shut down a pipeline that is operating illegally without a permit, aligned with their climate goals, while at the same time honoring the self-determination, sovereignty, and trust responsibility to the Native nations in this country.
That was Nick Tilson from NDN Collective. Charting a New Direction, that was the theme for the National Congress of American Indians Executive Council. ICT's managing editor, Dalton Walker, reports.
Over the weekend in the Gila River Indian community, the executive committee from the National Congress of American Indians gathered. The strategic planning retreat was the first time they met since the start of the pandemic. Part of that planning was highlighted by NCAI President Vaughn Sharp.
Yes, what we hope to accomplish is to be able to connect to all of Indian country to continue to chart that direction. This was an opening conversation for the board, but we know that we are in a post-self-determination era. So we want to really define that era of empowerment, of truth, of healing.
Some members of the executive committee met before sunrise, away from the resort and near a walking trail to reflect on the first day of spring. The governor of the Gila River Indian community was recently elected as NCAI's recording secretary.
So it was really an opportunity for the staff and for the leadership of NCAI to come together in person. Very powerful, very, very, very emotional for all of us to come together.
Sharp says she will work towards unifying Indian country.
When there's an attack on tribal sovereignty, we have to be able to respond to that unapologetically and aggressively, and unleash the voice of all of Indian country, unify the voice of Indian country to confront it. That's a core mission of NCAI.
In Chandler, Arizona, Dalton Walker, ICT Newscast.
The National Endowment for the Humanities was created in 1965 and since then has had just 11 leaders. Navajo citizen Shelley Lowe is the first Native person to lead the NEH. She led Harvard University's Native American program and served as a member of the National Council on the Humanities.
Over my time as a council member, I really got to see where our funding was going. And even more importantly, I got to see where our funding wasn't going, what communities we weren't reaching, what institutions we weren't serving. And I started to ask a lot of questions, and I started to say, how do we reach out to small organizations? How do we reach out to tribal communities? And that is going to be one of the things that I'm going to prioritize is how do we get the word out? I know that humanities is a vague concept sometimes, and people wonder, what does NEH do, right? I mean, when I was asked to be on the council, that's what I said. What does NEH do? I really want to get our information out. I really want individuals to think about us as a resource for the work that they're doing.
Sharing knowledge with future leaders is important to Lowe.
Well, I think it's really important for us to create knowledge and to share knowledge. And I think the essence of humanities is helping us to shape our meaning making, helping us to understand our place in the world and what the world is to us, but also really understanding that from our own cultural values and views. And I think being someone who works with students and has taught students, I see similar roles in NEH and doing the same kind of knowledge making and knowledge sharing.
Chair Lowe is the federal agency's first Indigenous leader.
It's a little bit intimidating, right? But it's exciting. I had the opportunity to step into my office the other day, and you walk in and you see the pictures of the past chairs, and you understand that, there's a new presence here. There's a new kind of background and way of thinking about things that I think will bring into the agency, and say this is going to be something that somebody else is going to follow me, and we're going to have more Native people in administrative positions, and I think it's really important.
That was Shelley Lowe, chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities. When we come back, Delana Studi shares her passion for theater. Stay with us. Native Voices at the Autry has new leadership, but she's not new to the stage. Delana Studi chairs the SAG-AFTRA's National Native Americans Committee. Plus, she's a 2022 United States Artists Fellow.
Native Voices at the Autry is the only equity theater devoted to developing and producing plays by Indigenous playwrights. In fact, it's how I got my start as a playwright. And so I like to say I make people's dreams come true. I take new plays by Indigenous playwrights. I help them develop the plays and get them ready for production. And then I send them off into the world. We're a launching pad. So hopefully you'll see more Native theater across the state. So like I said, I get to read plays. I get to play pretend every day. My day basically consists of lots of meetings, lots of reading. Right now in rehearsals for a short play festival. So I get to work with actors. And I mean, honestly, it's a dream come true.
Studi reflects on her personal project about the Trail of Tears.
Oh yes, well, my heart project is my solo performance piece called And So We Walked. We recently had our Audible premiere. We had our off-Broadway debut. It's been on tour for the past 5 years. It was the first play to go to, the first American play to go to Tunisia, to the Theater Festival of Carthage. And the reason why it's my heart project is my father and I retraced our family's footsteps along the northern route of the Trail of Tears, all 990 miles. And I wrote a play about our 6-week journey and also just our relationship. So in a weird way, it's a love song to my daddy. What was interesting is my father is a boarding school survivor. He's also an old speaker, which means his first language was Cherokee, and he didn't learn English until he went to boarding school. And so on the trail, it was as if he came alive. Like I got to see his authentic self before boarding school. And I was taking in all the trauma, but he had already learned how to cope with it. And so it was such a wonderful bonding experience for both of us. But I always say I got to see my dad be his true self finally.
That was Delana Studi. Oglala Lakota filmmaker Jimmy Warren put on a film camp for Lakota youth. As part of the day, his students produced this piece on the event.
Okay, sound quiet on the set. Scene no more. Take 2.
Warren opened the day with an overview of his career in movies.
So, when you look up this big Lakota, what will you find?
He also talked about some key elements of storytelling.
Our traditional way of education was through storytelling. And when someone would ask a question, one of our young people, it would be turned into a story and lead into the answer. And that process was critical thinking. That is traditional education that goes beyond, in my opinion, modern education.
Warren and his colleagues walked the students through some interview techniques. And what is one thing you would love to see change in the future?
One thing I hope to see in the future is today's generation build a better tomorrow.
I like to see us have more of an impact on the future, such as Bitcoin or Metaverse.
And had them help on filming a PSA announcement that will be used by the University of South Dakota Oyate Circle.
Now this is going to be probably televised.
The 7 students from Rapid City Central High School's Lakota Empowerment Club gathered for the day on the set of Warren's film, Remembering the Children, about students who died at the Rapid City Indian boarding school. It was a comprehensive introduction to the industry.
One of my favorite things I learned today was sound systems within filming. I really liked listening and listening out for things that could have ruined the production. Sound is one of the most important things.
The day ended with an honoring song for the boarding school children. In Rapid City, South Dakota, this is Amor Montgomery for ICT.
As we continue to celebrate Women's History Month, we feature the Ontario Native Women's Association. Its leader, Cora McGuire-Syrett, reflects on its charge.
We're overrepresented in every kind of area, whether it be the justice system, from child welfare, and but at a foundational level, what's really missing is the honor and acknowledgement of being a strong Indigenous woman and changing that story. I talk with my children and my daughters all the time, and they ask kind of what's being told about us as Indigenous women in the media. And, we talk about how we're more than victims, we're more than survivors, we're leaders, we're gatherers, we're knowledge holders. We are, our children are our future generations. And so being able to reclaim our space, reclaim who we are, and be supported as a community, because you can measure the health and well-being of any community based on the health and well-being of women in that community. Because when moms are healthy and well, the community is healthy and well, because we're raising future generations of healthy leadership. And so I think our leadership is scary, I think, for colonial systems who have been able to benefit on the backs of these stories of the crisis that we face as a community, as a nation, as Indigenous women, all across North America. So I think being able to kind of stop and reclaim who we are. We are the experts on issues that we face. And so I think it's about reclaiming our leadership.
McGuire looks to the future for the 50-year-old organization.
I think right away, the youth of tomorrow, the youth today in all of our communities are phenomenal. They stand bravely in the face of fear. And not only that, but also the women who are taking up their responsibilities as being parents and, changing that history of that legacy of intergenerational trauma. To me, it's I know we do have leaders, we do have change makers, and, we do have political leaders, for instance, but also at the same time, I always am honored and really humbled by when we're supporting a mom who's got 5 children, and she's able to be that mom. And when we're looking at, a family coming together and healing together, those are the real change makers every single day in every one of our communities. Every time somebody takes up their responsibility towards healing, they're making change for all of our future generations. And those are the women that I acknowledge and recognize every day, because they give me hope and inspiration to continue to fight the battle, to continue, when you're coming up against so many barriers, it's seeing, a mom give birth to a baby and her whole community is supporting her. So I honored each of them every single day.
That was Cora McGuire-Syrett, Executive Director of the Ontario Native Women's Association. After a 2-year hiatus brought on by the pandemic, the dancers are back in the arena. Stuart Huntington has more from the Denver March Powwow.
Often called the traditional kickoff for the powwow season, the Denver March event has been a mainstay since its inception 46 years ago. But COVID kept the doors closed for 2 seasons, so this year, when the powwow returned to the Denver Coliseum, it brought lots of smiles.
After COVID, it's definitely a good feeling to be back.
It's fun.
Definitely excited to be back.
It is so thrilling. I'm so happy to be back.
It's exciting. After 2 years, it feels like forever. There's like a long pause. And sometimes I wonder what happened to those 2 years. But now being back over here, watching all the people here, listening to the drum on the inside, the heartbeat is continuing. So it's good to be back.
The Coliseum was packed with vendors, drummers, singers, and dancers, all swimming in rich culture, bringing people back together.
This is the first celebration that we've had that we can all come together and sing and dance and heal and reconnect in the past 2 years.
It's a very great, momentous occasion that for 2 years we've been pretty much locked in our residences and very limited on our activities. This allows people to become social, and we are social people, so it is an amazing opportunity to interact and enjoy and be alive.
In Denver, Colorado, this is Stuart Huntington for ICT.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.